Please welcome Sally Bedell Smith and Gordon Sauter.
Do I go first? Or
Nope, go to the other side.
go to the other side?
Thank you.
Sorry. That wasn't a very royal move.
I guess we start.
Yeah?
On behalf of Sally and myself, I want to express our appreciation for your turning out this morning. Greatly appreciated. I first met Sally 40 years ago.
Eek. No, happily.
I had just been named president of CBS News and was in San Francisco for some broadcasting event. And at 6 a.m., there was a pounding at my door, and outside was a PR man holding a copy of TV Guide, which for the young people here, if there are any, was at one time one of the most potent magazines in America. It sold 3 million copies a week, and it was quite powerful. And the guy said, the documentary we aired last week, Sally Bedell says it's filled with bias, inaccuracies, and general degeneracy. And I said, the only poetry in my life. Who the hell is Sally Bedell? Well, as it turns out, Sally Bedell was a far better reporter than we were, and that the broadcast did have incredible problems. And with Mike Wallace and a producer, I ended up in one of the more consequential First Amendment trials in America, spending an inordinate amount of time doing depositions. And as I sat down for every deposition, I said, who the hell is Sally Bedell? So whatever. Sally Bedell then moved on to the New York Times and Time Magazine, and was a very distinguished reporter on television. And then she went into the book business and has produced a remarkable body of biographical material, which is not only relevant, but incredibly readable. We're going to focus this morning on the royals, but I've said to her that as you look at a biographer, you want to get a sense of the progress between the first biography and the subsequent ones. So I want her to just give very brief answers to perhaps the first 3 books that she did, and then we'll get into what we're here for, which is the royals.
Well, you're a CBS guy. You ask gotcha questions. But Fran is a great friend. We've been friends for all these 40 years. I mean, the Bill Paley book was amazing because as covering television, he was an iconic figure. Nobody had ever written a book about him, and there was everything to learn. I ended up writing not only a biography of him, but subsidiary biographies of his first wife, who'd never, ever spoken to anybody, Edward R. Murrow, his star reporter, Frank Stanton, who was his president of CBS, and probably Paley and Stanton were the most powerful, consequential business partnership of the 20th century.
What was the
and
most,
Babe Paley. But
what was the most interesting fact that you developed about Paley?
Well, I think the most interesting fact is that although he was a very astute adapter of things that existed. For example, he looked at radio stars and he said, oh, these people can also be television stars. And he had a real, a much more, his sense of showmanship was even more profound than I ever realized. But that it was Frank Stanton, his president, who really had the vision over the horizon to see what the potential was, for example, for television and color television. So, I mean, that was one of the many takeaways, trying to dig deep into the bandwidth here to remember what I was writing in the 1980s. And in the case of Pamela Harriman, I mean, wow. I mean, it's the closest. I'm going to talk about her tomorrow for the first time in many years. And she was the closest I've ever come to writing a novel. I mean, she was right out of the pages of Edith Wharton, actually. I had in my head the whole time I was writing that book, I had the character of Undine Spragg. If you've ever read The Custom of the Country, it's by far Edith Wharton's best. And Pamela was, she was using Undine Spragg's playbook for her entire life. And so that was really fascinating. And then Diana was the next book, which was serendipitous, really, because I had met her once and had met Prince Charles once, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But Random House asked me to write about her. 2 days after she died, I said, I have no idea whether I can write a book about her. My previous books took 5 years apiece. They wanted me to write this one in 18 months, and I said, I don't know how I can do that. But I went over to England when in the aftermath of her death, when everybody was flooding the parks and hugging each other and kissing each other and mourning her. And I did write the book. And what it turned out for me to be was something I entirely didn't expect, because I didn't know that much about her, but that it was a real psychological exploration, because she had so many profound emotional and really mental health issues that I had no clue about, and that played a really significant role in the difficulties of her 11-year marriage to Charles. So that was the big reveal there. Then the next book I wrote was about the Kennedy White House, Jack and Jackie Kennedy and their circle, and I really, really didn't start out to find out about his other women, but I did find a lot of them sort of. It just happened in the course of my reporting, and the fascinating thing to me was that the women you sort of always heard Kennedy associated with were, Judith Campbell Exner and Marilyn Monroe, and really I found this whole little coterie of highly educated, very aristocratic women who had had affairs with him, who kept quiet about it until I came along, and they talked to me. But it revealed, I mean, I just learned so much about his character, about Jackie's character, and to my great, good luck, good fortune, so many of the people who were close in the Kennedy White House were still alive. The John Kenneth Galbraiths, the Arthur Schlesinger, Ted Sorensen, Ben Bradley, just the whole gamut of Douglas Dillon, fantastic people. And I sort of got them, in their last years when they were all in good shape. And so that was a real gift, because I'd grown up hiding under my desk during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so it was a real revelation to get to know all these people in a completely different way, in a very personal way. And then I wrote a book about the Clinton White House, which was kind of playing off doing another presidential couple. That was a little darker, exploration, because there was so much that kind of went awry, at least in terms of Bill and Hillary Clinton's personal life within the White House, and I kind of learned to a sometimes disturbing degree the melding of the personal and the political. And then in the case of the Queen, that was something that was suggested to me by Random House, and it took me about a nanosecond to say, yes, I'd love to write about the Queen. It just so happened that I had the time to do it, to publish it for her Diamond Jubilee, which occurred in 2012. And I in the case of her and in the case of Prince Charles, I had first impressions that really, before I decided to write books about them, that really kind of shaped my approach, because when I first met the Queen, it was in 2007. She had come to Washington after having gone to the Kentucky Derby. She was there for a big state visit. And my husband and I were invited to a reception at the British ambassador's residence, all instructed on how to greet the Queen. You do not ask her questions. No, no. You say, "Hello, Your Majesty," and then you say "ma'am," like pronounced like spam, and basically take your cue from her, which I immediately told Steve, and we were in line because we were friends with the British ambassador, and he introduced us, and Steve, who in his earlier years was a real railbird and spent a lot of time around racetracks and knew how to read a race, and so the first thing he said to her was, "Well, ma'am, did you put a wager on Street Sense," which was the winning horse? And she sort of looked at him, but then she didn't get offended. There was something about the way he asked the question that she sussed out that he knew something. And so the two of them in front of me, I mean, I'm sure everybody thinks when they talk to the Queen it's 10 minutes, but it was probably 3. But in the course of that, they completely replayed the Kentucky Derby. And she was so excited about it because in England, all the races are on turf, on grass. And this was on dirt. And it was a muddy track. And she'd never seen this before because the jockeys all wear multiple goggles. And so she said, I kept following the yellow cap, and he kept going like this, and the mud was all over the place. And she was waving her hands all around. And I thought, this is the Queen? This is this imperturbable person? What is going on? And she remembered everything, and her eyes were dancing. She was smiling, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I remembered, I flashed back to a friend of ours who had painted her portrait back in the 1980s and was telling us about what the experience was like. And he said, "You have to understand, she talks like an Italian. She waves her hands all around when she talks." Again, I thought, well, there you go. And so I traveled around with her, and I saw her in action in lots of different situations in Trinidad and Bermuda, and watched her sort of go through all of her paces, talked to a lot of people who were close to her. And what I did, what the challenge was with that book was really to part the curtain and to tell people what she's really like behind the scenes, what she's like as a wife and a mother and a friend, and what a great wry, a lively sense of humor she has, what a beautiful smile she has, which she does more now than she used to, because her formidable grandmother, Queen Mary, said, when you're queen, you must never smile. Never smile. No, never do that. But she smiles, and she sings, and she does wicked impersonations of people. She's a great mimic. And so all these things I wanted to bring out, that people, and to see her, to humanize her. And then in the case of having written that book, I thought, well, of course, I have to write about her heir and the next king. And he, too, I had seen in another kind of serendipitous situation back in 1991, when my husband and I were at a house party in Windsor, and we went to a polo match. Charles, for many years, was a big, big polo player. He played here in Palm Springs, by the way, in 1986. So this was 1991. He'd been having trouble with his back, so he wasn't playing. There was a big tent. He was over on the other side of the tent. We were in a small group that included one of his grandmother, the Queen Mother's best friends. And he adored his grandmother. They were extremely close. She was about one of the liveliest people you could imagine. And her friend was also a live wire. He spotted her, and he did something, again, that I thought, royals don't do this. He came over to us. He bounded over to us. And he saw Zara. Her name was Zara Cazalet, and her husband, Peter Cazalet, was the Queen Mother's horse trainer. He gave her a big hug, gave her a kiss. Zahra, how are you? How's your, I mean, he was so sweet and solicitous and warm and charming. And I thought, this is the guy in the tabloid headlines who's, portrayed as this stuffed shirt, this old fogey, this guy who's being really mean to Diana. And it was such a disconnect from everything you were reading about in the press. And I just thought, wow, that's so interesting, but tucked it away. But when I decided to write a book about him, as the Prince of Wales and the next king, I always kept that in mind, and the challenge with him is that he has been the Prince of Wales longer than any other Prince of Wales in history, the previous one being Edward VII, but he had a few years on him because Charles didn't become Prince of Wales till he was 9. But he's had this long wait, and he made his job as Prince of Wales into a real job, and did an astonishing number of things in the course of that. And so the challenge was to take, all this panorama of enterprises and philanthropies and causes, and sort of get my arms around them, and to try really to connect the dots, see what the forces were, both in terms of events and individuals who helped shape his life, and to really understand and explain him, because he is widely misunderstood to this day. And so it was a matter of kind of putting it in a framework and bringing some new perspective to it, and showing, what he is like. Again, different a little bit from what you see, but
His wife.
His wife, the love of his life. She's really, Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, is really at the heart of the book. He has loved her really loved her for 40 years. It's a romance of love, interrupted, resumed, and finally fulfilled when they got married in 2005. And I just found her to be a wonderfully appealing person who, because largely of the way Diana portrayed her, was vilified for many years and sort of sucked it up and kept quiet. But Annabelle Goldsmith, who's a great character and has known all of them for years, she said to me that Camilla is a laughing, warm, maternal creature who's really very sexy. And that is what appealed to Charles when he first met her back in 1972. I was able to pinpoint the exact moment. And ironically enough, she was introduced to him by a former girlfriend named Lucia Santa Cruz, who lived in the same apartment building in London. And he fell madly in love with her right from the moment he met her. And he was single, she was single. She was, as I said on CBS this morning, I said she was, and they all laughed. I said she was well navigated. She was. She had had an affair with Andrew Parker Bowles, a very dashing cavalry officer, for 6 years. And as one of her oldest friends, fantastic character named Lord Patrick Beresford, told me, she was completely potty about him. And so she was really in love with Andrew, but he was away conveniently for 6 months. And so she and Prince Charles had this sort of lovely interlude together of 6 months in 1972, and he was just thrilled to have found somebody he could cherish and who had all kinds of affinities with him, because they both loved the countryside, and they were, they loved gardening, and she was just a proper country lady. And just had a great sense of humor that they shared. But she was, at that moment, in love with Andrew Parker Bowles. he went away to the Navy, and he thought she'd be there when he got back. And his father and Camilla's father and Andrew's father were really, really good friends, and so they did this wonderful little trick. They published an engagement announcement in the Times of London, which of course forced Andrew Parker Bowles to finally, get going and propose to her. But Charles was really pretty heartbroken that she had gone off and married this guy, but she did, and she loved him. And he went on, and he had lots and lots of love affairs during the 1970s. And then eventually it was clear that Camilla and Andrew were not going to work out. As he had an eye for the ladies, including Prince Charles's own sister, Princess Anne. There's got to be a Venn diagram there. But they did get back together again. So I mean she by then she was really in love with him, and they did, I firmly believe, stop their romance for 5 years when he married Diana in 1981. But the marriage fell apart very, very quickly, far, far sooner than most people realize. And he did go back to Camilla in 1986, and they resumed their affair. And really, it took her a long time to be accepted after the whole drama of Charles and Diana. And since 2005, since their marriage, she really has been such an important force in his life. She has made him happy. One of his friends, one of Charles and Camilla's friends, was the late and wonderful Joan Rivers, who he affectionately called Miss Potty Mouth, and she said to me, she said, Camilla's wonderful because he can be rowdy with her, and he can laugh with her, and he can be normal with her. And I think you can't underestimate the importance of that. And she's also taken on her role. At age 57, she was a country lady who had her dogs and her horses and her gardens, and she's taken on now a lot of very important charities. And also, most importantly, she has won over the Queen. Everybody in the royal family was very much against her for many years because she was seen as the other woman. But the Queen likes her. She likes the fact that she's unfussy, she's down to earth, she loves her horses and her dogs, and she also has kept the same hairstyle for all these years, just like the Queen.
Tell me about how did the father react to the son and
Prince Philip
Yes.
and Charles. Well, when Elizabeth became queen in 1952, she was 25 years old. She was very, very well prepared, actually, for it, both by her father, by a tutor who was enlisted in 1936 after the abdication. She had very good advisors, but she was surrounded by the gray men, all these very formidable aristocratic courtiers who were watching her very closely. So she was, and unlike any of her friends, she was a professional woman. She was queen, and she had to do a lot of things every day. She had to meet people. She had to, give out awards. She had to sign documents. It's not a trivial set of challenges that she faced every day, and she had to do it with consummate professionalism and with great conscientiousness. Mary Soames, who was Winston Churchill's youngest daughter, who I interviewed, and said that her father was most impressed by how assiduous she was about everything she did, how focused and how conscientious. You'd send her a box of documents on Friday night. She'd have them on their private secretary's desk on Monday morning. So that was her focus. She was going to be a professional. She was going to be a very good queen. So she gave the responsibility for the family to Prince Philip. He had a lot of other things that he was doing, but he was responsible for the children's education, for their upbringing. And he saw very quickly that Prince Charles was a very sensitive and quite vulnerable young man. And so he decided that he was going to toughen him up and sent him away at age 8 to boarding school, which was kind of the custom among aristocrats in those days, that he hated. It made him miserable. And then he doubled down and he sent him, well, Philip had gone to Cheam and been very successful there. And then he sent him to Gordonston, which is in a very remote corner of northeastern Scotland and is kind of like boot camp, or was then. A lot of physical challenges, fast runs before dawn, followed by cold showers, open windows throughout the winter. It was a kind of a Lord of the Flies atmosphere where the kids kind of took charge of disciplining the younger children. He was beaten, he was bullied, he was hit on the rugby field. I mean, he had a tough time at Gordonston. But his father insisted on that. His father insisted on a career in the Navy. And so there was a lot of friction, a lot of distance between the two of them. And once Charles left the Navy and was able to make decisions on his own, he carved out his role for himself. But I always thought it was kind of sad that for periods of time, he and his father would communicate by letter. And they wouldn't even, see each other except at very big formal occasions. But on the other hand, I think it has, as one of Charles's cousins said to me, he is soft on the outside, but he has a very strong inner moral core. And Gordonston, as much as he hated it, gave him a kind of steeliness, and it made him a little less conventional. And it also, most importantly, because Gordonston had a real community service ethos, it instilled in him this drive to help underprivileged kids in some fashion, and led to really what has been his most celebrated charity, which is the Prince's Trust, which he started in 1976 and has helped nearly 1 million young people get skills and find employment through these micro grants that they would give, including to the actor Idris Elba, who loves Prince Charles and praises him at every moment. And he got his start. He went to acting school as a result of the Prince's Trust.
What about Charles as a father?
Charles as a father is, he has always been a good father. He's a very busy man. He's driven. And so he was often away, but he made a real bond with William and Harry, mostly through the countryside. He taught them how to shoot. He taught them about nature. He taught them how to see. Taught them about birds and plants and gardening. So he had that real bond with them. But one of the most damaging things, I think, that Diana did in the book that she authorized back in 1992 by Andrew Morton, Diana, My True Story, or Her True Story, was that he was a bad father, a selfish father, which was really calumny. But it did take root in the public perception. And one of the things that he had to show really after the death of Diana was that he was, in fact, a good father. And in contrast to his father, who sort of ruled him with an iron grip from an early age until he was able to break free after the Navy, he has given both William and Harry a very light lead. He allowed them to choose the schools that they wanted to go to. Ludgrove and then Eton. And that was a very fortuitous choice because Eton College, their boarding school, is right next to Windsor Castle. And so in the years after Diana died, the Queen and Prince Philip, particularly the Queen, took a very, very strong hand in their upbringing, and they would routinely go up there. And Charles never interfered in that. He welcomed that. And when it came time for them to choose a service career, which is what members of the royal family do, they didn't want to go. They had no interest in the Navy. They wanted to go into the Army, and he allowed them to pick two advisors, two very experienced and wise military advisors. One in particular, Jamie Lowther Pinkerton, who'd been in the SAS, and it was just a really, really good guide for them. And they both went into the Army. And the Army was really the making of both William and Harry. Harry, because he was the spare after the heir. William is obviously next in line. But Harry was allowed to do what he really wanted to do, which was go into combat. And he did, with distinction. He not only became an Apache helicopter pilot, he became an Apache commander. And he served twice in Afghanistan. And for his own self-image, I think it was extremely important. And he also has, since he left the military, dedicated himself to helping veterans both deal with physical as well as mental problems that have resulted from what they have endured in combat. For William, it was equally important, probably in different ways. He never saw combat for obvious reasons, but he loved flying helicopters. And so he was dispatched to Wales and joined a helicopter rescue crew. And then after he left the military, he continued to do helicopter rescues. And it was good for him because he spent all these years kind of mucking around with ordinary people. And he wasn't protected or, treated in any kind of a special way as Charles was all through his time in the Navy. There were all sorts of allowances, dispensations made for him. So it was a sort of, his career in the Navy was kind of artificial. And so he's given them a lot of latitude to make their own choices, which I think is very enlightened. He didn't hire any of their advisors. Their third and most important advisor was suggested by the Queen, Sir David Manning, who was the ambassador to the United States. He is the gray-haired man in the room. She hired him in 2009, or suggested. They hired him. He expected to be with them for a year or two. He's with them to this day. They recognize that he's a very smart man who can give them good advice. And Charles has always sort of just given them that freedom, which I think has been very important to both of them. He also allowed them to figure out how they were going to do their philanthropies. I mean, Charles has always been an entrepreneur, a starter. He's not a CEO, but he has. I mean, the number of charities and the range of things that he has done is really so misunderstood and so underestimated. In the case of William and Harry, they set up a foundation that was actually modeled after Stanford University, something called Catalytic Philanthropy, where they would invest, give them goals, and then say, you have to accomplish that, and then we're leaving. So they didn't want to get involved in the endless cycle and sometimes exhausting cycle of money raising. And again, Charles didn't say, you have to take over X, Y, Z. You don't have to take over my philanthropy. So
well, how is the father and the grandmother? What's her feeling about their love lives and
their love lives? Well, she's a very tolerant person. She really is. I mean, she's obviously old school in so many ways. But when Kate Middleton came along, and one of the things that, when you go back to when Prince Charles was supposed to get married, he was supposed to marry somebody who was a virgin, if not, virginal, and we're talking 1980 when there weren't many virgins around. And, he had gone through a whole string of aristocratic women who were unsuitable for that very reason. So he had to rob the cradle and marry somebody who was 19, and we all know what happened with that. William met Kate. They lived together for 8 years. The Queen didn't blink an eye. She came from a very middle-class family. Her great-grandfather was a miner in Durham. And the Queen is a very sensible person, and she recognized in Kate qualities that could work as, when she eventually became queen, that she has a lot of dignity. I mean, the two of them, William and Kate, have this wonderful and not easily acquired combination of dignity and accessibility, yet they have they can somehow create a mystique. They don't let people get too close, but yet people feel they're approachable. It's really interesting. And Kate, unlike Diana, who constantly stole the limelight from Charles and made him very upset, Kate, who is, we all know, is an incredibly glamorous, beautiful woman, is really careful not to overshadow William. And so the Queen embraced her almost from the outset and saw the advantages that she brought, not only because she loved her grandson, but because she had qualities that could be incorporated into the royal family. She's smart, she's a fast learner, she mixes well with people. Meghan is just so kind of wonderfully out there for the royal family, but Harry is kind of out there too. And Harry is fifth in line to the throne, soon to be sixth in line. Barring some catastrophe, he's never going to be king, but Harry and William, for that matter, have the advantage of being half Diana. And the world still really loves Diana for all of her flaws, for all of the problems that she had, for all of the efforts that she made to undermine Charles and even to undermine the monarchy. She is still widely beloved. And so Harry is half Diana, and for that reason, he'll always have a special place. And when the announcement was made, of Harry's engagement to Meghan, I was in London, and I actually watched their interview with one of the Queen's cousins. And she was just nodding approval the whole time, because she is a very poised young woman. She is well educated, first in her family to go to university. She has a dual degree from Northwestern. She made her way in the tough world of Hollywood. She is a very good performer. She can take on the role of the Duchess of Sussex or whatever she becomes. But as the Queen's cousin said to me, if she, we can't say no to Harry. If this is someone who makes him happy, we're with it. And if she really loves him, and if she really is committed to making him happy, they both are interested in the same philanthropies. They can do some very, very good work for the royal family, and also because of who she is, because she's an American, because she is a kind of, because she's biracial. I mean, she brings in a whole new constituency for the royal family. There are all sorts of people who were either indifferent or perhaps even antagonistic to the royal family who now say, wow, the royal family is really cool. Prince Harry's marrying an American, and she's biracial, and it's so 21st century. So, and the Queen is, I think she's cool with that.
Did you ever hear from the Queen after your book? I mean, did you ever get a sense of her reaction?
One does not, to use her nomenclature. She typically does not read books or magazine articles or newspaper pieces about herself. I remember one of the first little epiphanies I got about her is that she is the least egotistical person around. She's very, very concerned about the image of the monarchy. She's very concerned about how her family members reflect on the monarchy. But I remember one of her private secretaries told me about the time he came to her when he first started his job, and he had a rough cut of a documentary that was being done about her, and he said, "Ma'am, it's great. Wouldn't you love to see it?" And she said, "I think not." She said, "I see enough of myself every day, and I don't need to see any more." And so I think that's probably her view about the crown as well. But no, I mean, I'm on good terms with people in Buckingham Palace, so I think that it went down well. I inscribed a copy with the most elaborate inscription I've ever made in my life, and I just had to do another one for the Prince of Wales, and I mean, for my book about the Prince of Wales to give to her, and it was, your loyal servant, I hope you, would take time. I can't even repeat it. But it was being dictated to me by her cousin, and and she knew exactly what I should say.
Are we allowed to discuss your upcoming book?
Sure. It's, I mean, I've been doing some deep reading, but I decided, while doing both of these books, really, that in light of The King's Speech and in light of the first season of The Crown, in light of Darkest Hour and other movies and popular depictions of the royal family in the last 10 years, people have become more aware of the Queen's parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And so I'm doing a kind of a prequel. I'm going back in time and doing a portrait of their marriage and their royal partnership, because they're admirable. I mean, they're admirable. And the Queen Mother in particular is lively. He overcame, as we know from the King's Speech, a terrible stammer, and he was not prepared to be king. He was not ready for it, but he overcame it all. He became an inspirational king. He really helped inspire an entire nation during World War II. And so I just thought it would be a lovely thing to delve into and to learn more about.
How are you getting the kind of in-depth information you've had about these two books we've been discussing? How are you going to get that kind of access buried in history?
I'm working on it, but I mean, I won't have 300 people to interview, obviously. There is a handful of people who are octogenarians and nonagenarians who I'm going to try and talk to very quickly, people I know. But it will be a weird thing for me because I love, you can tell I'm a real introvert. I love going out and talking to people, and I mean, I'll just have to see how much I can do it through documents. I know already some people who have documents that are not in the public arena, and I think that's what I have to do and also just go back and kind of reinterpret everything. And
what is your sense? Have you enjoyed The Crown?
I have watched. I enjoyed the first season. The second season has dismayed me, because Peter Morgan, who I know quite well, who's the creator of it and has written it all, he creates a sort of a structure of fact, and then he embellishes and sometimes distorts a lot of history that I think borders on irresponsible. And so my poor husband, I ruined his viewing experience by throwing so many pillows at the television set when I got exasperated. But I mean, I think people can take it as historical fiction, really, and enjoy the beauty and, I mean, the amazing amount of money they spent on the production values, the quality of the acting. The writing is superb. It just, a lot of it isn't true, but I think as a viewing experience, it can be enjoyed. But I think people have to take it with a grain of salt. You know, it's only people like me who have immersed themselves in the topic who can say that happened, that didn't happen, that happened. And I mean, I can't tell you, since the second season started, people stop me in supermarket parking lots and say, well, did Jackie and the Queen really sit down with the corgis in their evening gowns and confess to each other that they were both shy? No, they didn't. But you know, there are lots of things like that, and I've been answering lots of questions, and will continue to with happily, because I think it's useful for people to know what really happened.
Why?
Oh, you could read the books too. You know, you could read the Prince Charles book, and because I don't think he's going to be very easy on Prince Charles.
Why are
sadly.
we so obsessed with them?
Why are we so obsessed? Well, we're obviously more obsessed because there's an American. You know, it goes back centuries. I mean, I think it's because our origins are there. We broke away from them. And I think more than, say, the Dutch royal family or the Danish royal family, that there is just a connection to the British royal family, and the glamour and the panoply and all of that, I think, and the characters. And there have been lots of dramas that I think have drawn people, you know, going all the way back to Princess Margaret, back to the Duchess of Windsor. And it is the gift that keeps on giving, I think, for people like me anyway.
Well, we have overstayed our welcome. You're the easiest interview I've ever done.
Oh, well.
And thank
it
you
was
ever
fun.
so much.
Oh.